Walking with Dinosaurs is finally back, with all 6 episodes launching yesterday via BBC iPlayer for those of us in the UK. Elsewhere around the world, you'll have to wait a couple of weeks, with the series coming on the 16th of June in the US at the very least. This is going to be a very generalised, as spoiler-free as possible review of the series. I'm not going to dive deep into each individual episode, but instead I'm giving you my feelings on the series as a whole. Let's dig in. Get it? Paleo joke, eh? It's a good way to start the video. So, Walking with Dinosaurs 2025 is not Walking with Dinosaurs. If you're going to watch this, you really need to come in with that expectation. This is not a follow-up in any real way to the old series, besides, fundamentally being a dinosaur documentary. Narratively, musically, tonally, and most importantly, formally, this is a very, very different show now. Now that of course doesn't mean it can't stand on its own 2 feet, and this review will be done with this in mind. I want to discuss the show on its own merits, irrespective of the name change, which I know will disappoint people, but if the show is great regardless of the name, then we can look past that surely. We will talk a little bit more about the naming at the end of the video though. Now, as I mentioned, formally the show is very different, and the biggest change here is clear. No longer is this a dinosaur-only affair, instead being interspersed with regular real-world cutbacks to real-world paleontology being conducted at dig sites around the globe. Now logically, this is a really good fit. You see paleontologists dig up the fossil and find new bones, and they connect narratively with what that dinosaur is going through in the CGI segments. I don't think it's inherently a bad idea, but in reality this is by far Walking with Dinosaurs' biggest problem. And the problems are threefold. Firstly, cutting back to the paleo segments saps all the narrative momentum out of the scene. I genuinely said out loud, "Oh, for f***'s sake," at one point in an early episode, because it kept cutting over and over at the worst possible point. I really think they should have kept all of this real world paleo segments to the end of the video in a self-contained section, which they then could have overlaid with the CGI segments that are relevant as need be. The show is very much built with a consistent narrative and characters in mind, and these segments just kill the narrative dead over and over again. I will say that episode 1 is by far the worst for this, so if you make it through that and you don't find it that annoying, you're probably in good shape for the rest of the episodes. Second problem, the links between the paleo segments and the CGI segments often feel fairly tenuous at best. It sometimes feels like we're cutting away to hear something that just isn't really relative to the narrative at that point. There are exceptions. There's a very good one in episode 1 with the Triceratops we'll talk again about later, and some of the later episodes do get better at this. Episode 6 in particular, which was by far my favourite in the entire series, has much more logical cutaways. I think it was done a lot better in episode 6 and to an extent episode 5. But these cutaways happen all the time. It takes up about half the show, and that's a problem because, thirdly, they're just a little bit boring. I feel quite bad saying that, but they really truly are. 5 of the 6 episodes involve nigh on identical shots of people slowly chiseling away a bone and swaddling it in plaster, whilst the paleontologists pretend to be surprised at the most basic of information you've ever heard. It's also condescending and surface level. Again, that isn't their fault whatsoever, and I don't want to suggest that the science behind the show isn't cutting edge and advanced, because it surely is, but it just never comes across in these segments in particular. To give the worst possible example, they're discussing Edmontosaurus, and we follow 2 paleontologists down a river and then up a steep embankment. They find the trackway off an Edmontosaurus, and then they offer us information like, it's got 3 toes, and the foot is wide. And then finally, there's lots of Edmontosaurus. This genuinely takes several minutes away from the dinosaurs and the narrative we were building to offer no information whatsoever, because in the very next scene, we see a massive herd of 3-toed Edmontosaurus wandering along. There's no need for this to be there other than to pad out the episode. Seeing the real-world paleontology is cool, but it would have benefited so much from showing us some stuff in the museum and some of the fossil cleaning process and the fossil putting together process and mixing it up a little bit. There's just no need for 6 episodes of people chiseling away a bone, especially if you're not going to go into more depth as to what's going on. It feels like they've tried to appeal to absolutely everybody, people who have no knowledge of dinosaurs whatsoever, and because of that, they've just been too scared to offer anything of depth. It's a waste of some immensely talented people. So that's half the show, and that's a big dud. So that kind of limits what the show can do, in my opinion, but there's still half a show to go. What about the dinosaurs? Well, largely positive. The models, first of all, are incredible. They really are. And for a lot of the dinosaurs here, they are some of, if not the most paleo-accurate and lifelike these creatures have ever been. There's a lot of love and attention gone into all of them, and there's really no, for me, negative outliers. But particularly positive ones include the Spinosaurus, the Triceratops, the T.rex in particular is fantastic, Lusotitan, Pachyrhinosaurus, I could go on and on. But it's safe to say that the animals look really good. They don't necessarily look fantastic in screenshots, but in motion I think they look fantastic. And a large part of that is also, of course, because of the animations. Now, I know everyone memed the frozen in place, suddenly physics-defiant Inferno Draken, but that does seem to be a one-off error, and by and large the animators have done a really good job of bringing these animals to life with the appropriate heft, majesty, and sometimes outright creepiness. Seriously, the Rex and the Carcharodontosaurus in particular have scenes that feel ripped right from horror films. It's very, very effective. They don't necessarily always blend in well with the real world. The problem with the CGI here is not the models or the animations, it's just the meshing of the real world and the dinosaurs. Backing up all of this is of course the sound design. Now the sounds are familiar, you're going to hear a lot of crocodile hisses and herbivorous bellows, but it does feel appropriate and well made by and large, with the baby dinosaurs in particular having some absolutely adorable noises that are really going to make you want to fear for them. And fear for them you should. So that's 3 positives. The sound design is pretty stellar, but the music a little bit less so. The music in the original Walking with Dinosaurs is so iconic, you can probably hear those opening sunrise notes in your head right now that I've mentioned it. That theme is long gone, and generally speaking, the music becomes your fairly typical nature documentary work. There's an exception for episode 6, My Beloved, which has some beautiful pieces highlighting its climactic moments. I've got no idea why episode 6 is so much better. Episode 5 as well to an extent, but those are the 2 best in my opinion. Those 2 do feel more akin to classic Walking with Dinosaurs, and the music is part of that. Other than that, it's a fairly forgettable experience. I mentioned the behaviour of the Triceratops as interesting earlier, but unfortunately it stood out as interesting because the show is lacking a little bit here as well. So much time is spent on predation and prey behaviour that it feels like very little was left to explore anything else these animals have to offer. There's definitely some highlights in there. The Triceratops as mentioned, the full pelt underwater swimming of the Spinosaurus is fantastic. The social bonding of the Albertosaurus was really interesting. And again, episode 6 is largely a focus on anything other than predation, and that made it a lot more interesting to me personally, but otherwise there's a lot of hunting. Now, some of these are really well done, they're really thrilling, but because there's so many of them, they really start to lose their impact, and they become a little bit repetitive. It does feel like a little bit of Americanization has crept into Walking with Dinosaurs here with its focus on hunting, and some of the individual behaviours. There's a scene where a T-rex full on roars at its little prey, which buys time for other things to go down that, again, I don't want to spoil, but it's just a daft move. It just doesn't feel like a logical hunting behaviour. This sounds really weird to say, but at times I would suggest the Rex behaves less realistically than the one in Jurassic World Rebirth. So often the show doesn't feel like a documentary, it feels kind of just like a narrative dinosaur TV show. The narration by new narrator Bertie Carvel is good. They don't quite have the gravitas for those big dramatic moments like Branagh did in the past, but they certainly weren't a negative. I'd be very happy for them to return. The dialogue they had to work with, a little bit less so. There's a lot of cliches, it's all a little bit trite, it's all a little bit vapid. Unfortunately, that's kind of indicative of how I feel of most of this show. See, it's hard to put into words when what you're trying to get across is a vibe, but Walking with Dinosaurs just doesn't feel right. There's lots of beautiful little highlights in here, and it's clearly made with a lot of love and up-to-date science. But it also feels like just the inherent direction from the very top was wrong. What we've ended up then is an okay dinosaur documentary that, if it didn't have that Walking with Dinosaurs name, wouldn't really have garnered that much attention. I saw someone on Twitter say this isn't meant to be Walking with Dinosaurs 2, it's a new, more scientific take on the subject. Well, to that I would say, A, where is all this science? Because it's not shown in the show. It's shown in the model of the dinosaurs and in some of their behaviours, but we never hear about it, we never really go into it. And secondly, and I said I'd talk about this, why is it called Walking with Dinosaurs? This really irritates me. Well, really, fundamentally then, why is it called Walking with Dinosaurs if it's not meant to be a continuation of Walking with Dinosaurs? The original show doesn't loom large in our hearts because it's still massively scientifically relevant. A lot of what's depicted in that show is completely discredited since. But the show has this unmistakable feeling to it as a culmination of so many different facets. The music, the unique filming method, the narration, the narrative, the use of animatronics, which are entirely absent here, and more. So much of that just flat out isn't here. So why build up hopes by using that name if you're not going to honour what the show was about in the first place? I don't want people to think I dislike the show because of this. Hell, I don't even dislike the show, it was fine. I just think it's a mistake, and I think it's a purposefully misleading mistake, and I don't think we should be defending what is essentially a cheap marketing strategy from suits in boardrooms. I've got more heated about this than I realised. Anyway, I love that a wide range of talented paleo people have been involved with this. So many people involved with this I have so much respect for, who I follow on Twitter and I follow all their work, people who I've got so much time for. And it showcased what a varied and inclusive profession paleontology is. And it is, and that's a fantastic, beautiful thing. I just wish they'd been given a better show to work on. Whether it was called Walking with Dinosaurs or Dino Paleo Bonanza 2025, it just ends up okay. It's not a bad show. Please don't misconstrue this. This isn't a bad show. I'm just disappointed that it isn't great. The bones of this show contain so much love and scientific rigour. Unfortunately, they've been buried a little bit too deep under the sands of mediocrity.